Hello everyone, and welcome to another commentary video. This one we're talking about context and an ecological mindset, going over some of the readings that were assigned this week, and hopefully getting to the bottom of ways in which patients and providers can reach better health outcomes together. So our two major topics here are, well, the real major topic is Street's ecological model that was introduced in an earlier reading. It was Street 2009, and then this week I had you look at Street 2003. It's the same kind of stuff. We're going to go into that in greater detail here so that we can think about its implications for us here in applied communication in health and wellness. And then we'll also consider briefly the challenges of research, which is kind of at the core of this class. So I'll explain what I mean by that towards the end, but let's get into Street's ecological model first. Now, these two articles combined, neither of which should have been terribly arduous to read, but these are very influential. The ecological model is well recognized in health communication and also in biomedicine. So it's not super complicated, but it is fairly well known, and it represents a good starting point um, in the biomedical field for people trying to make sense of what health communication is and why it's useful. So it should also be useful for us in figuring out how to use health communication. So the most useful models in health communication are able to account for context. The most useful models in communication in general are considering context. We're going beyond this speaker message receiver model of communication and starting to think about how other aspects of communication, the context, social relationships, these other intermediary factors, how those things influence the act of communication. In this case, communication regarding health, which is also in turn going to influence health. So this matters to us, and this is useful because it's starting to put this into a model that helps us make sense of the world. So Street is interested primarily in direct and indirect paths of influencing health in this kind of commentary that he's making. Both can be influenced by communication. And that's really important for us as communication people, but it's also really important for doctors to recognize this. It's also really important for patients to recognize this, which you might be more likely to be. But let's dig into the details here a little bit. Here are two diagrams, one from each of those essays. The one you should have looked at for this week is probably the original one, looking at the actual ecological model. The one you looked at earlier in the semester was primarily concerned with indirect and direct paths, but let's explain both of these. So the one on the left of the screen here is the original ecological model, right? An ecological model of communication and medical encounters. And what you see here is all of these little arrows showing things like, well, here's the organizational context, here's the media influence. So for instance, we're at a hospital system, it's got its own culture, and then that's part of it, but we also have people's opinions about things being shaped by the media. We've got plenty of examples of that these days, but I'll spare you another COVID rant. You also have the cultural context. How does the culture feel about health? Lots of plenty examples there today. I'll spare you the rant. Oh, and of course, what else do we have here? Political and legal context. So you have all of these contexts that make the environment in which communication occurs. So imagine you're at the doctor today talking about pretty much anything, whether it's diet, vaccines, medication, or something. How does the world outside that office shape what's going on in that office? Those are these different contexts that are trying to be pulled in here. Now, Street's also pointing out to us that you've got two individuals. You've got the patient and you have the healthcare provider. You have their respective predisposing influences. You have their respective cognitive affective influences, such as their goals or perception of power or their perception of the other person, their preferred communication strategies. And then you have both of their respective verbal and nonverbal behavior. So that could be nonverbal, body language, that could be tone, that could be eye contact, that could be whether or not they speak the same language. whether they're using the same level of vocabulary. One's a specialist, they're going to use more technical words, right? So there has to be this meeting of minds because it's a communication act. That's how it works. Um, because of that, Street continued this work over the years, of course. The Street 2009 article that you read earlier, well, that was kind of an application of this ecological model. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for communication? Well, in particular, you see a lot more specifics in this diagram on the right of outcomes that might be happening in well, intermediary outcomes, proximal outcomes, communication activities, and you see all this stuff that somehow directly or indirectly affects health outcomes. It's kind of a no-brainer, right? It feels like we're stating the obvious. Yes, they talk, and that talk influences the patient's health. Wow, what a concept. Well, but it kind of is. We're stating the obvious, but it has to be stated because a lot of what happens in biomedicine, what happens in med school, is not thinking about these parts of it because they're like, well, that's obvious, right? And they don't think about this because it's just a thing that happens. But this thing that just happens is the pathway by which healthcare occurs. So you cannot ignore it. Now, before I dig too much further into the implications, I want to compare the ecological model to an intercultural model. If you've taken a different class with me before, you may have seen this model. I like using this one because it conceptualizes a lot of the same stuff. Um, so remember at the beginning here, I said that good health communication models are also good communication models. Well, here's a intercultural communication model, which is basically showing the same thing because what I tell my intercultural students is that we're still just dealing with communication. And pretty much every communication act is an intercultural communication act. Because again, compare this one from James Newlip, 2018 Intercultural Communication textbook, to Street's ecological model. We have an embedded interaction. You have individual A, maybe in this case the doctor, and individual B, maybe the patient, right? They're interacting through verbal and nonverbal symbol systems. That could be the same language, it could be a different language, and each language is going to have different nonverbal aspects that are snowballed into that, assumptions, things like that, that are shaped by a lot of other stuff, including the socio-relational context. How do they relate to each other? Power dynamics. What is their relationship? How well do they know each other? And of course, you have all of this shaped by other environmental contextual cues, right? The larger culture, what microculture or subculture or minority groups they might be from, the actual environment of the hospital. Well, you can see a lot of parallels between these two models because guess what? When we're talking about communication and we're complicating that process, what we're interested in is the complexity of the situation. When you're digging into scientific research, a lot of what we do in science is trying to simplify things, trying to account for things, not add more noise into it. But when you're talking about communication, we're really interested in those different factors and how they influence the interaction because they do. And some of those things matter a ton. Case in point, Street 2009, again, think about this direct and indirect paths to health outcomes. Now, the benefit, why do we want to complicate this? Why, right? Because we look at this list, we can see a whole bunch of intermediate outcomes, proximal outcomes, and communication functions that will directly influence health. That gives us a lot to work with to improve our health, a lot. Otherwise, we're just like, I need a pill. Well, maybe, but none of that matters. The prescriptions don't matter. The interventions don't matter if the patient doesn't do them, if they don't listen to the doctor, if they don't believe that they can become healthy, if they don't take action. That's all contingent on the success of the communication. Now, I think one of my favorite kind of implications of all of Street's work is that communication itself is therapeutic. Not just talk therapy, but communication acts are health, right? It is healing. Interacting with other human beings, the act of communication itself, co-registering our experiences, that is part of our health. We can think about this in a number of different ways. We can think about this in the super sterile biomedical context in the sense that just talking about our health problems will lead to better outcomes. But talking about our health problems, even if it's not with a doctor, that helps us because it helps us feel empowered in our lives. It helps us feel agency, and that leads to better health outcomes. Um, but it's also therapeutic in a lot of other different ways too. The act of communicating, this is how things like social support occur, right? You can't get the support you need from your loved ones if you don't tell them something's wrong, right? Things like that. So again, it might feel like we're stating the obvious here, but this is the entire backbone of health communication. In this case, also, I want to take another moment to remind you of the intermediate outcomes that Street is talking about, such as things like adherence to a health plan and fostering trust and developing healthier habits. These are those kind of intermediate outcomes that can occur from and be facilitated by proper communication. Those are all good things. And as an aside, they can be measured. So this is important. You may not care about this because you're an undergraduate at this university, just kind of taking this class, maybe because I recommended you do it at advising. But this is important for the real world. This is important for biomedicine as a field. This is important for people trying to get grants from NIH. This is important for reviewers at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, trying to fund research because they are looking for health outcomes. They're looking for measurable things. They can say, did you or did you not improve the health with this program? If not, why should we care? Well, this is another way. This is like what I do in a nutshell. And it's a challenge because of the problem I just described, right? People in biomedicine don't always look at health communication as something that is concrete, measurable, real, and important. But it is, and here's an example of it. All of these intermediate health outcomes can be measured and described mathematically. It might take a survey, it might take some self-reporting, but we do have methods of doing that. That's kind of what I do. This matters for research, it matters for health, and it matters for patients. We would be describing these things as mediators or moderators, mediating or moderating variables. Statistically, I'm using statistical terms right now. So if you study statistics at all, this is what would be described as a mediating or moderating relationship. You've got health intervention, health outcome. In between there is a path that goes through. The health intervention goes through the path of many of these intermediate variables: adherence to health plan, patient compliance, health literacy. Then those lead to health outcomes later on, right? That's what we're describing here. Which one it is depends on how central that is to the relationship. So is it over here or is it right in between them, right? That would be the difference between a mediator and a moderator. Or other way around. You get the idea. The whole point is they are, we would describe it one way as a mediator or moderator, depending on how central they are to the relationship between communication and the health outcomes. So communication matters. This may sound like an obvious lesson to learn, but some things do require stating the obvious. This is one of those things. The implications here are that doctors can and should spend more time engaging in healthy communication, thinking about what that looks like. In med school, they may not have a whole lot of consideration of health communication beyond just, we'll have good bedside manner. Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, it might take some health communication classes to figure that out. Not to pat myself on the back too much, but this is really what we are trying to do in this field. Translating the findings of communication to the world of medicine, to the world of health, to the world of patients and your lived experience, our lived experience. We're all patients and we're all providers in our own kind of ways. We all probably can benefit from thinking about things this way. But it's specifically for doctors, specifically for the field of biomedicine. We don't just want to focus on precise, isolated measurements of health. That's not how health works. It's not just a heartbeat. It's not just your oxygen blood saturation, right? It's not just levels of vitamins. There's more to it than that. Measurement and health outcomes are affected by communication, and that's, of course, important to us, to me at least. All right. Now, final thoughts on this whole thing. When I had you look at that communication of health communication handbook, did you find that boring? I kind of do. I'm not gonna lie. And I know the authors, and they're great people. They're very smart. But this information is technical. That's the main thing, right? And now, in a way, the fact that that might have been a little bit boring for you is a good example of why I had you read it, not to torture you, but to understand that this is kind of part of the problem. Research is specialized. There's a reason why we go to school, why we go to grad school, why we go to get advanced degrees. It's a specializing process. At that point, by the time you're getting a PhD, you're not necessarily getting smarter, like you're getting more specialized. You're getting and you're learning more about a certain area so that you can become an expert. That's what it means to be an expert, is you have specialized knowledge. But the thing is, you got to do something with it. You got to take that knowledge that you gain. All the stuff in my head doesn't matter if I can't explain it to you. Likewise, with a doctor, if all the stuff in their head doesn't matter if they cannot explain it to you in such a way as to help you make better health choices. And the same thing applies to health communication research and research of all kind. It is specialized. It has to be applied to be useful. That's what we're trying to do in this class. I'm not trying to make you all experts of all the same stuff that I am, other than I want you to have a basic understanding of technical health information. I want you to be able to read information that you're like, okay, this is above my pay grade, but I can see what it's talking about. I can see how it might be important. And I want you to understand the research process, how that happens. Once you have those skills improved enough, then you can apply it to real life for real benefits for you and for your loved ones, I hope, and for the world. So I know that sounds like kind of a lofty goal, but that's my job. So I always, as I ask you to do in most of the discussion board posts, we're trying to take all this information and think about, that's great. How do I make it useful to me? What does this do for me? Because I want to be healthy. So that's the challenge. When you look at something like the Health Communication Handbook, you're looking into the field of health communication, where we get models like Street's Ecological Model, how that knowledge is developed, refined, and applied. And understanding of that process, how that sausage is made, will help you apply it going forward. All right, that's enough talking out of me for one day. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for your time. I hope you're doing well.